Welcome to Life Choices. This is our premiere episode, and today I'm very honored to have a very, very special guest, Mr. Peter Shankland. Peter, welcome. We need to tell the audience a little bit about you, but there's so much to tell, I don't know where to even start. Maybe we should start with how we met.
Okay.
I was at Everest College, and I was doing a training for the instructors. And Peter was the head of a department at Everest College at the time. And we met, and I have to tell you, out of all the people in the room, he just had that wonderful smile, that wonderful paying attention, caring what I said. You know, I felt like you were right there with me. And out of all the people in the room, I think you and I are the only two that are still in contact after all these years. And it's been a lot of years.
It's been about a decade now, yeah. And I remember so much because in that training, I was moving on in my jobs and my career. And you had said in your training, asking questions is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. So when it was done, I approached you and I said, hi, I introduced myself.
I have a question.
I'd love some time. I have a question. Can we get together, have a cup of coffee, and I'll throw some couple questions at you. And here we are 10 years later, doing things together and growing and being successful and making good choices.
And it's amazing. And we've done a lot of good things together. We wrote one of the Life Choices books, and your story was in the...
Yep, it was in this one right here.
It's Never Too Late. Yep. So Peter wrote a wonderful story. These are anthologies, the Life Choices books, and they're written, each of them by 26 different authors. And Peter's great story is in Life Choices, It's Never Too Late. And you've written another book. Tell us about your other book.
Well, I have my book, and I'll show it to you. I'll be glad to tell you a whole bunch about it a little bit in a while. But it's called Life in Tens, Stories Shared to Spark Insights and Conversations. And it is a story of my life, but not a traditional memoir kind of story. It is designed, when it says insights and conversation, it really means personal insights and meaningful conversations with your friends. Read it, reflect on yourself, read it, share with your friends, ask questions, have discussions based upon my stories and experiences. So it's really meant to be interactive and group-oriented, and I'm going to read from it a little bit later.
Oh, good. Well, one thing is that your insights are always awesome.
Thank you.
We need to tell the audience, too. Peter is a masseuse. He was the head of the massage school.
I wasn't the head, but I was a main teacher.
Oh, well, I know you were a big shot.
You're kind. You're too kind.
So, and he said to me, would you like a free massage? And, of course, I'd like a free massage. So I had one, and he was the best masseur that I had ever had. I've had massages all over the world, and I've got to tell you, there's nobody that gives a massage like Peter does. But yours are more healing.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I love what I do, and I think it shows. But I really appreciate your support on that one. But I'm excited for this whole new program and this venture of Life Choices. Well, and what you hope with this program and where you hope it to go. And
well, I think the important thing here is that the main audience is over 50. And a lot of the people who are watching are over 50, and they've made choices to get where they are in life today. And so each of the shows is going to be about choices that we made and why we made those choices and how other people make choices and whether or not those were good choices, and does it matter?
Right, right. Well, what I found exciting when you floated this with me and you invited me to the premiere show is the notion of choices. That it itself as a program, choices about everything, choices about partners, choices about money, choices about work, choices about vacations, choices about diet, health. The concept opens itself up to some fascinating conversations and possibilities.
It does, and that's why I think this TV show is going to be amazing, because it's opened up to so many different types of guests that we're going to be having, and so many choices of what they've done and what they've said and how they've gotten where they are. We have some incredible guests coming.
Do you have who will be there besides me? Thank you. Who else do you have coming, just as a preview for folks? A couple things they can tune into in the next few
Well, we have
episodes.
Bob Doyle, who was one of the writers from that very famous book, The Secret, and the movie.
Wonderful.
And we also have Lynette Chappelle. Lynette was a show person in the Beyond Belief show, which was the big show with Siegfried and Roy, the magicians, here in Las Vegas for many years. It was like the #1 show, and she was like the #1 female in the show. She was the evil queen. So we're going to have
Exciting.
her and find out a little bit about being evil.
Sure, backstage choices.
Yeah.
Great, that sounds wonderful. Well, some folks have that to looking forward to.
Yeah, yeah. So tell them what you wrote in your book. I love what you wrote in your book
Well,
about
the
choices.
concept of choices itself, I mean, if we want to jump into that, maybe a good place to start is before the particulars. What are choices, right? How do we make choices? What are the things we do? And so I've been thinking about this since we discussed doing this show. And as a way of looking at it, for me, I think choices can be like external choices or internal choices. And by external, they can be the simplest things of what am I going to have for dinner tonight, or what car should I buy, or
What clothes should I
what
wear?
clothes should I wear. Sort of outside things, which we make all the time without a lot of conscious thought to it. Then there are internal choices. And these are the choices that may have a more significant impact on our life, the things that change the direction of our life, getting a partner, getting a new job, moving to a new situation, financial
or even
investments.
boundaries.
Boundaries,
You know,
sure.
setting boundaries is a big choice, and a choice a lot of people don't know how to make.
Absolutely. And I know we've talked about boundaries before. You've got some wonderful suggestions on how to do those types of things in making your choices. Well, with that idea of internal and external boundaries as a way of looking at things, I found something in my book that I'd just like to briefly read to you because it's about exactly that.
Yeah,
So
I'd
if I
love for
may,
you to.
Just a bit of a preview about my book. I traveled for about 18 years overseas, and I've been extensively through Asia, met a lot of people, did a lot of interesting things.
Well, you lived in a monastery for a while,
I
didn't
sure
you?
did, among many different places. Yeah, I've also slept in a chicken coop.
Oh, well, now that's an interesting
there
choice.
we go. But I wrote this. I found this before, if I may. As we analyze options and consciously establish goals, then act towards their end, we can never know the limitless number of events and possibilities that may intervene. We must be open to these changes and adapt accordingly. Aim to quiet your mind, open your heart, align every thought, word, and deed, and act with positive consequence. Along the way, we may feel uncertain as to the perfect direction, and I'm okay with that, though it has its moments. I often ask myself, are the consequences of my actions reflecting my better nature? If every choice I make is a positive reflection of who I am, then the end result must be necessarily good.
Wow.
Yeah? So that idea of choice making and how we go about making choices in our lives.
You know what I
is-
thought of when
yeah?
you were reading that? When I was a child, I read a book about Alice in Wonderland.
Okay.
And Alice got to this division in the road, and there was a tree, and the Cheshire Cat was sitting up in the tree. And Alice says to the Cheshire Cat, "Which way should I go?" And he said, "Well, depends on where you want to go." And she said, "Well, it doesn't really matter." And he said, "Then it doesn't matter which choice you make." And when you read that just then, it made me think, you know, that when we make choices, then we have consequences of those choices.
Yes.
And so we have to make a decision. When I make the choice, do I make the choice for myself, or do I allow someone else to make the choice for me? Because very often in life, you know, somebody else tells us you should do this or you shouldn't do that or whatever, and we go ahead and do what they say we should do instead of what we thought we should do. And then we have to live with the consequences of the choice. They don't have to live with the consequence of the choice. We have to live with the consequence of the choice.
Sure.
So isn't it better to make our own choices and live with our own consequences than to let someone else make the choice and then we live with the consequences?
I absolutely agree with that. I think that when we make our choices in our lives, we take into account other people. We take into account our needs. We take into account other people because we're not in this alone. We need everybody's help to get along and to succeed. But just because we consider other people in our choices we make does not mean we have to do what they want in relation to us. We need to consider other people, of course, but always return to ourselves. Because really, we are responsible for everything we think, everything we say, and everything we do. and that applies to everybody about everything. So when we willingly turn over our choice to other people and we do what they tell us, down the road we oftentimes find that's not quite right.
Yeah,
Don't you agree?
exactly, exactly. And I liked what you said about having an open heart, how important when you're making a choice to have an open heart.
I find that certainly applies to relationships, right? Choices in relationships and how we make our choices there. If you don't have an open heart going into a relationship, to me an open heart means you're closer to your genuine self, and the person you're seeing is seeing more of the true you. If you go in with a closed heart, the choices you make are going to be not genuinely reflective of who that person is getting or who that person is considering, and you in turn considering them. I certainly have run into problems. It's taken me a long time to understand that.
That's a big topic. That could go on for a few hours about how
Sure.
important that is to be who we really are when we meet people, to be authentic.
To be authentic is I'm not sure we're taught how to do that, are we?
No, I don't
Right?
think so.
Right.
You know, we're taught to always be at our best. And one of the things, when I first started doing television, I wanted to be perfect. You know, I wanted my hair to be perfect, my makeup to be perfect. I wanted to be thin because everyone says the camera adds 10 pounds. You know, I wanted everything to be perfect. And you know what I found? I found the audience didn't like me all that much. And once I started being authentic,
Right.
once I started being me and letting them know it's it's okay to be a little bit overweight, it's okay to have a bad hair day, it's you know,
Yes, I know that well.
it's okay to have a lot of things that aren't perfect. It's okay to make a mistake in our grammar and correct it. It's okay to say the wrong thing and apologize. Be authentic. Be who you really are. That's when people started liking me better.
There you go.
And they started writing me notes and letters, and I like that. I like getting those notes and letters.
Sure.
And people saying, well, would you talk about this, or could you talk about that? And they didn't do that back when I was trying to be Miss Perfect.
It puts off a different image that people
Yeah.
may distance themselves from.
So we have a choice about how we present ourselves to the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I like to present myself to the best of my ability, but I think that has to do with our behavior as well as our appearance.
Absolutely. I think people define us necessarily mostly by our behaviors, the things we do. People can talk a game, but it's how your choices affect your actions. What do you actually do that really, I think, primarily script the way people think about you? Wouldn't you think?
I think so. I definitely believe that. Even just this morning, it was interesting. We were coming in the building, and I was carrying some things in, and a lady was going up the stairway, and she turned and she said, "Do you know where I can find choices?" And I was thinking she was coming to the to us, you know, to the show, to the TV show. And I said, "Oh yeah," and I started telling her how to get up here. I said, "I'm Judy," and I'm, you know, telling her how to get up here, and she's looking at me like, I'm not going to a television station, right? And then I said, I don't know. And then John came up, and John said, what is she looking for? And I said, choices. And he said, oh, that's across the hall. That's a different business, blah, blah, blah.
Same thing.
And then
Okay.
she turned around and she said, but thank you for being so nice, Judy. It was good to meet you and to know your name. You know, and it was kind of cool that
Absolutely.
that here this person, I totally made a mistake, but she still thought I was nice, even though I was going to send her to the wrong place, you know. But I didn't mean to be sending her to the wrong place. But you know, we have a choice as to how we deal with strangers. We have a choice as to how we treat people. Like even in a restaurant, I notice that when I'm with people and they treat the servers poorly, then I don't want to be with them because I think they're going to treat other people poorly as well.
I think that's a reflection of how they are. Absolutely.
And I think the server has a choice as to how they deal with that person. When I was in Africa, you're going to love this story. When I was in Africa, I had a date with this man who was really rude. And we went to dinner, and he ordered a steak, and it came, and it was bloody, and it was, you know, on the plate. He wanted it more medium well, not rare. And he was really rude. He was nasty. This steak is bad. Take this steak back. It's a bad steak. It's bad. So the waitress very nicely took it back, and she fixed it. She brought him a different one. You know, she took it to the chef, brought a different one. He still wasn't happy. This is a bad steak. This is a bad steak. This is a bad steak. Well, by the time she brought it back the third time, and he was throwing his fit, she just reached over and picked that steak up off the plate, and she said, "Bad steak, bad steak, bad steak," and she threw it down on the plate. And she said, "If it acts up again, you call me." And she walked away. I have never laughed so hard in my whole life. It was so funny. It was so funny. And driving back, I said to him, "Would you ever eat in that restaurant again?" And he said, "As a matter of fact, yes." He said, "That waitress was so cool and so funny. I would go there just to see her," he said.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
it changed his whole attitude because he was being such a awful person.
Fantastic. Well, this notion of life choices and the show title Life Choices, when we were talking a little bit about what we're going to share today, I think at different stages in our life we make different choices because of our experiences as we build. So life in tens, the title of my book, means life in decades. So, you know, your childhood, your adolescence, your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s.
Right.
And at each of those stages, choice making changes, right? Because when you're a kid, you have less experience to go by. So your choices in a large part are defined by your parents and your family and the things you do.
Do you think that we come into this world an open slate, ready to learn how to make choices? Or do you think that there are times, well, do you think some people or all of us, or I don't know how to ask this because it sounds a little woo-woo, but do you think we're already pre-programmed for choices when we come into this world? Do you think that babies who are laying there are thinking, when I get old enough to say something, wow, I've got something,
to say? I think that's a question philosophers have been asking for ages, and religions try to answer. So I, of course, don't have the answer, but I have my answer.
Well, let's hear it.
Well, the idea of a clean slate doesn't quite work for me, that we're born with a clean slate, and from the minute you're in the womb and you come out, you're sort of painted in your mindset and the groundwork is being laid. Because I'm Buddhist, so I believe in reincarnation. So if we take on board that notion of past lives and the experiences and the consequences of our choices in past lives following us into this life, because that gets you familiar with the word karma, which is the law of cause and effects according to your Western thinking. We bring with us the consequences of actions of past lives. So if that's the case, we're certainly not a clean slate when we come into this world. However, that for me does not go to the extreme of it's fate, that it's destined that we suffer or experience a choice in a particular way. There's a middle ground there between the consequences and the habits and mental habits we bring to this life and our ability to decide on our own and explore some of our own free will. So it's a bit of a 50-50 deal for me. Does that make sense? Right?
So that's in the first few years of our life.
Right? And for me, I look at examples like Beethoven or Prince, who are people who were born in at 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. They're writing incredible music. They're playing 15 instruments, or prodigies of any sort. I just feel the idea of past lives gives me a better understanding or a greater ability to accept that child prodigy's skill than a blank slate. So that's for people to decide on their own, if that makes sense to them, yes. But those particular artists, why do they have that skill unless they knew it and perfected it earlier?
Yes, that's a good question,
that kind of
isn't it?
thing. I know it's a question you could go on about, but the choices we make of childhood, you're guided by your parents.
Yes.
Certainly, wouldn't you say they're the #1 guides for your choices when you're children, right?
Yes. Yes.
So part of writing my book, which was a 2-year experience, you know, I looked back a lot on my childhood and did a lot of reflection in this book. And, the choices I made, I saw were at the time unconsciously, maybe avoiding certain things going on around me and my family. So I make this choice to be the perfect son and the perfect student and the acolyte boy in the choir at church, just to make my parents happy. Right?
Because the choice to make your parents happy would have been better than the choice to do something to get them upset.
To get them upset, or to really share everything that I'm thinking or what I know is going on around me in the world.
Yeah.
And in my family, in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Choices like that.
And then what made you make the choice to travel the world?
Yeah.
I mean, I know you studied in Nepal for, 8 years or something?
I lived there about 6 years. Well, then it gets into the teenage years, which I think are incredible for choice, because that's a transition, right?
Yes.
How do you decide when you're a teenager? When are you old enough to decide for yourself? When were you allowed to decide for yourself as a teenager, if you sort of move into that area? Like, could you?
Well, my parents were very advanced for the times.
Okay.
And I was always allowed to decide for myself from about the time I was 7 or 8 years old.
Oh, wow.
But here was the deal.
Okay.
You can go and do and be and have anything you want to if you're willing to deal with the consequences of it.
Okay.
So, like, if my dad said as a teenager, you don't go over to Pickaway, Kansas and go to the beer hall and dance all night, because if you do, you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
Right.
And then my brother would want to go to Pickaway, Kansas and dance all night.
Because that's what they do in Pickaway.
And I wanted to go where my brother went. And so I would go. And when I got home, then I had to deal with the consequences of it.
Right.
So then they gave me a new rule that said, if you're going to go somewhere where we told you not to go, you better call and tell us you're going anyway, because if anything happened at home, if there was any kind of problem here, someone got killed or hurt, and we had to get a hold of you, what if we couldn't find you?
Right.
So if you're going to go somewhere where we told you not to, you're going to call and tell us where you're going, even though you know when you get home you're in trouble.
Fair enough.
And boy, I did. I tell you, every time I went somewhere I wasn't supposed to go, I'm calling home, hey, Daddy, you told me not to go to so-and-so, but I'm going there. And he'd go, okay, just get ready, And
that's great. That's that's quite rare, I think, in parenting, but I'm something I would agree with, actually.
Yeah, and you know what? It really worked out well, because if something did happen at home, they knew where I was.
Right.
And this was before cell phones. I mean,
Sure. It was
today
much harder
you
to
can
keep
call
track.
your child.
Sure, it's easy, exactly.
But back then you couldn't.
Right.
And but he had a lot of specific rules, but you could go do whatever you wanted to do. You just had to understand there are consequences to whatever choice you make.
Yep.
And some of the consequences are better than others.
Yeah, absolutely. Beyond the consequences of wanting to be the perfect son, when I look back on it, probably the number one thing in my childhood was the choice to learn. I loved learning. I just did. I always felt like the day I skipped school was the day they were going to give me the answer to everything I wanted to know.
Yeah, and you wouldn't be
that
there.
attitude. I wouldn't be there. Oh my God, I missed it.
Yeah.
And when I was in 6th grade, so I started school at 4, so I was 10 years old in 6th grade. I was always the youngest in the class. We had this teacher, because my mother was a teacher, who my mother had heard about. And so she went to the superintendent of the school and said, I want my child in this teacher's class. So they put me in there. In 6th grade, 10 years old, this is how my 6th grade class was run. She wrote, the teacher, she wrote everything on the board that was due for the day, and you could do it in any manner and fashion you wanted, with any person you wanted, and check in with her as you go, as long as it's completed by the end of the day. We did experiments all the time. We got to bring in cardboard boxes and build our own little carols and decorate them. The whole learning year was your choice about how you wanted to do it and who you wanted to do it with, and she just guided you. I thought that was the best classroom and the best way of learning. That has totally stuck with me my whole life. That guided
love
learning.
that.
It was amazing. It was a fantastic teaching.
I never heard of a teacher doing that before.
Never. And that was absolutely the best learning experience in my childhood. And then I grew up, and then you get to be a teenager and you make your choices there, and I chose to go to college. And I enjoyed college, but I moved out and I was working full time and I was going to college full time. So my choices were split. You have to make money and pay for your daily bills. You have to go to school full time and juggle that. So for the first couple years, I juggled it okay. But once I defined my major, which was interpersonal communication, I really focused on that, and then my GPA got a lot better.
Right.
My choices got better. My focus got better. My priorities got better. Well, I got that degree, and I wasn't happy yet. So I sought a master's degree in speech communication, which I then did in my 20s. And that was the best learning experience of my life as far as structured learning goes.
Right.
I love that. I love my teachers. I love the choices of the courses and the thoughts, how that all works. Excuse me. And this starts the journey. When I was about to graduate, one of my undergraduate students, because I had a teaching assistantship, said, "I'm going to Australia. You want to join me? My family knows people there." So I'm like, okay, I need a break. Graduate school was difficult, challenging. I was exhausted. So he went first, and I followed up a couple weeks later. And 18 years later, I came home.
Wow.
Yeah, and the choices along the way were these organic kind of choices. When it comes to choice making, how we make choices, I'm generally a big picture. I want the umbrella of the choice, and I'm happy with the particulars filling themselves in as we go along. So I went to Australia. I traveled with him about 5 months and ended up with no money. I was in the far northeast corner near the Great Barrier Reef. I had no money. I didn't quite know what to do. I walked into this restaurant. I introduced myself and I said, "Hi, I need a job." And the boss went, "Oh, we just lost a bartender." I went, "Oh, I've been a bartender when I was in graduate school." I said, "I will work for you for free for a week if you give me a place to stay and food to eat. And after the week, if you don't like me, I'll be on my way." Week went by and I had that job another 6 months. I saved my money, and it was time to leave because my visa was up. And I looked at a map and I said, wow, Japan's only 7-hour flight away. I taught communication. I can teach English as a second language. Got online, boom, off I was in Japan. That simple. And I can go on in my timeline, but it's really about the choices we make.
Right.
and how that came to be.
Right. And you've been making incredible choices your whole life. I always feel so at home when I'm in your presence.
Thank
You know, from the day I met you, it was just this connection with you. You're such an incredible person, and I believe that you have helped me make better choices, and especially where my health is concerned. And we're running out of time today, so
Are
I
we
won't
really?
have,
Too fast? Can I come back?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So I want to invite you to come back and let's
thank
talk
you.
about all the health,
Yeah, sure.
the health choices,
things
because
and
you know so much, and I think our audience would absolutely love to hear so much more from you. But before we go, is there anything that you would really like to share with the audience to tell them?
well, we all have a choice, so of course I'd like to tell you a little bit more about my book, because there's my book, which I just described.
Yes.
But coming with this book, I also drafted Life in Tens, Activities Shared to Spark Memories and Storytelling,
Ooh.
where I detail how I came up with my book, and I give a template for what I did, if someone's interested, something like that.
I want that. You know what, since I've been talking to you about your book, and you've told me how it was such an inward journey
Absolutely.
into everything in your life, it's made me think about my journey, and that maybe I'd like to do that. I'd like to write about it by decades. I think if anyone's writing a book, you know, I teach people how to write books,
Right.
but I've never written one by decades before. And I think I'd really like to try that with my own life and see what comes out. And I'm sure a lot of you out there would probably like to do that as well, because I think when we get older, we want to leave something for people to remember us by.
Sure. Well, you know that it's interesting that when I wrote the book, Now I can see how it's a very external choice. But when I wrote the book, the idea of doing it by decades was not my template. I just started telling my story. And as it progressed, I realized that structure of telling it by life in tens was making itself known. So it's sort of a backdoor way of arriving at that, which was really interesting.
And what I love about your book is that it's your story, and it is a memoir, but it's got so many life lessons and, like you said, so many thoughts and insights and so on. And so I just think this is such a great idea to do like a workbook or a guide for other people to kind of figure out how to do it for themselves.
And then I have another companion journal, which is Life in Tens, Ponder This. And it's just a journey to reflect. It's a personal journey. In this book, I ask certain questions that I asked that the readers, maybe they're too personal to discuss in a group. So I call them questions to ponder. And they're just things I want people to think about. Well, I've compiled them all in this journal for people to just sit quietly and reflect on certain things.
Well, I have the book, but I want both of those before you leave here today.
Well, they're yours. They're yours.
Thank you.
So anyways,
thank you
so much.
This has been wonderful. We've so enjoyed having you with us.
There's 1,001 other things we can talk about.
I know, and we're going to have you back because hopefully this show's going to go on for a long time.
Well, it's great. I'm really excited, and congratulations on it and everything that's going to unfold.
Okay, would you like to tell people how to get in touch with you?
Sure.
Or how to get
the
your
easiest
book.
way is you went to www.lifeintens.life.
Lifeintens.life. Oh,
and
well,
that will
that's
take you to my
easy.
website, and you can see all 3 of these books, and you can order them. There is a hard copy available online with Amazon. Those are available hard copy on Amazon, and there's also an ebook version of this.
Oh,
I'm working on
wonderful.
a audible version of your book, but that's a learning curve that I'm getting on board.
Wonderful.
So,
Peter, thank you for being here.
thank you so much for inviting me.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. This has been an interesting and exciting interview for me, and I hope that you will continue to join us here at Life Choices in the future.
Choices. We have choices. They are the source of the success in our lives. When things happen to us, we can choose to believe they happened for a reason. We can discover opportunities in the most difficult experiences if we are willing to look for them. It is what we choose to think about each experience that determines how we respond to it. How we respond determines whether or not we find richer, more purposeful, more joyful lives. We are the only ones who can choose our attitudes and the principles that we live by. Choose well, my friends. Choose well.